folks who lived here felt it all around them. The Indians claimed the mountains were home to their spirits. And the legend of the early Dutch settlers tells of the ghosts of Henry Hudson and his crew, who roam these mountains still. Around here, they still tell the story of a man who met the magic of the Catskills head on. His name was Rip Van Winkle.
Hello there everyone, I hope you are all doing well, inshallah. In this video lecture, I'll try to explain and explore into Rip Van Winkle, Washington Irving's early short stories about American history and American style of life from 1819. In this video lecture, we are going to explore themes, symbols in relation to the short story, as well as the elements relating it to the Romantic movement, and explain some of the aspects that attach the story to the notion of the American common man, the American hero, and the romantic hero, and the idea of the wilderness. As we have already seen in the classroom lectures so far, in dealing with the American Revolution and the relationship to American short stories and texts, by reference to the Age of Enlightenment and its development and the massive changes leading to independence, there is always a historical and a social context related to the literary tradition of every era and every country. I always tell that if someone needs to understand a text, a poem, a narrative of any kind, they need always to refer to the social and political and cultural realities of the era. So here there is a context to this story. It was after the war that a kind of heroism appeared, and the national voice became very significant, enriching people's beliefs and minds and altering their perspectives. So the heroism of American literature, from Indians to white men, became a myth. Some stories were told in folklore, some other stories were considered legends, but the idea of American hero or heroes asserted a kind of optimism and strength, reinforcing the idea of the American character and encouraging the rise of national literature, focusing most importantly on ordinary people. We will see this with the explanation from the slides, especially concentrating on the idea of the common man.
Once upon a time, in a picturesque village nestled in the Catskill Mountains, there lived a kind-hearted and easygoing man named Rip Van Winkle. Rip was loved by everyone in the village, especially the children, for his playful spirit and gentle demeanor. However, Rip had one flaw. He was notoriously lazy when it came to work, much to the frustration of his hard-working wife, Dame Van Winkle. One crisp autumn day, seeking an escape from his wife's nagging, Rip wandered into the mountains with his loyal dog, Wolf. As he climbed higher, he encountered a group of oddly dressed men playing ninepins and drinking a mysterious beverage. Rip, always up for an adventure, joined them. After drinking some of their strange brew, He felt overwhelmingly sleepy and soon drifted off into a deep slumber. When Rip awoke, the world seemed different. His beard had grown long and white, and Wolf was nowhere to be found. Confused, he stumbled back to his village, only to find that everything had changed. The people looked different, the houses were altered, and even the sign on the inn bore a different name. Rip discovered that he had slept for 20 years. At first, the villagers were wary of this disheveled old man claiming to be Rip Van Winkle, but soon they recognized him from old tales. Rip learned that the American Revolution had taken place during his long sleep, and his village was now part of a new nation. His wife had passed away, and his children had grown up. His daughter, now married with children of her own, took him in and cared for him. Rip Van Winkle became a beloved figure in the village, telling stories of the old days and his mysterious adventure in the mountains. He spent his remaining years in peace and leisure, no longer nagged about his laziness. The tale of Rip Van Winkle became a legend, a story of a man who slept through the greatest changes in history but awoke to find his place in a new and welcoming world.
As you can see here, the story is about a man who sleeps for 20 years, and when waking up he discovers that America has changed. His town is now changed, and he is transformed from a mid-aged man into an old man with a white large beard. The story is not about the imaginative side or folkloric fairy tale. It is also related to the age of enlightenment, to romanticism. We'll try to interpret and analyze this in relation to reference, to themes, and try to connect this to the importance of American literature at that time when emphasizing on the idea of heroism, independence, and the myth of the national hero. The story may seem folkloric or told just for fun, but as a political metaphor, it is steeped in symbolism. The most important symbols in the story are the characters, Rip Van Winkle and Dame Van Winkle. As a man who is submissive, who is lazy, who is careless, he symbolizes America as a country under the British rule, the period where America was still during its colonial era, namely what they used to call British America. It is unable to find change or think of change because the lights of independence or revolution are not yet taken into consideration. As a woman who is always nagging her husband because of his uselessness, Dame Van Winkle is the British crown, the British monarchy, symbolizing control, colonization, and power. I believe that the writer of the short story was very clever to symbolize these elements through his characters and other important aspects in the text. Another important symbol in the story is related to the dog, who is a character mainly symbolizing loyalty. He can also refer to a kind of protest against Dame Van Winkle because he is always barking at her. The problem with this dog is that he always complains without action. Maybe it refers to the fact that American people at that time, being still, let's say, loyal to their British crown, they don't really appreciate the fact that they are still British Americans. They hate the king. They are always complaining about the plight and the ill treatment from Britain, but they have never thought or believed in the idea of a revolution or taking action. In this context, the dog becomes the symbol of subjugation and servitude to the master. The Dutch group that Rip Van Winkle meets in the woods is a symbol of history, and it is here that we find a kind of mixture between facts and fiction. The story is not only based on imagination, but it also is based on historical and cultural aspects. The German-Dutch folkloric group that Rip meets in the forest is a symbol of the past, the origins of the American people and their beginnings, especially in the area of New York and New Jersey. It symbolizes the story of Dutch colonization, because before British troops came to America, New York used to be known as New Amsterdam. It was a colony held by the Dutch. After some fighting between the two troops, England managed to take over the land and transformed New Amsterdam into New York, and of course later added or re-established New Jersey. The second important aspect in history that we will always refer to in this story as relating Americans to their origins is the Henry Hudson exploration. We will see this better with the themes, but generally speaking, Henry Hudson was an English explorer who was sent by the Dutch to explore into America, and of course he died in the Hudson River because of some mutiny from his group, and he never came back. We will see this better when discussing history as a theme. President George Washington's portrait, in contradiction to the portrait of King George III by the beginning of the story, is a symbol of a shift, the transition taking place from colonial times, to the post-independent era. Let's say post-revolutionary era, to be more specific. So the picture of President George Washington is a symbol of independence, a shift from the monarchy to the republic. With this kind of contradiction, clever contradiction through the pictures, through images or portraits, the writer is emphasizing, highlighting the fact that British Americans are no longer British, but rather they are now free American citizens. On an equal footing, we have the symbol of the inn versus the symbol of the Union Hotel. The inn, by the beginning of the story, is symbolized to be a place where people gathered to gossip and waste time. Here in this context, it is a symbol of laziness, carelessness, and unproductivity. As if people were satisfied with the status quo, they were not thinking of change or difference. The Union Hotel, on the other hand, is a symbol of political and economic activity. Returning to history as a theme here, of course, the writer did not only focus on the fictional side, but he also highlighted the myth of Henry Hudson, an English explorer who died in the Hudson River in 1611. This man was sent by the Dutch to explore into the New World, but because of certain mutiny by his group, they decided to kill him along with his son and return back to England. This group did not want to explore or spend more time at sea because they were tired, and Hudson refused. The result of this was that he died and his body was never found. The myth of Henry Hudson in this context refers to the idea of this man being the one who is guarding the mountains. We come back to the point of Henry Hudson and his importance as the one who discovered New York. And of course, the reference to him is mythical, but it is also historical, suggesting that he will be always looking after the area for the future generations. It is a reminder also that the origins of these new Americans is British and it is not Dutch, because it is the English who discovered New York. New Amsterdam transforming into New York. The setting in the story is also appreciable because we have three important settings, three important periods. By the beginning of the story, we have the puritanical colonial era, colonial America, and the stereotype style of life surrounding the village, people living as British people or of Dutch origins, for example, with a man who is useless and indifferent, careless about his lifestyle, is a reference to the British Americans who were colonized and ruled by the British Crown. So the story begins by portraying life in colonial America. And then there is another setting taking place when Rip Van Winkle sleeps for 20 years and misses the revolution. In this period, it is the revolutionary America. It is the age of enlightenment and the age of reason. It is the lesson that is connected to this one, the one that you are supposed to deal with in the exam. The age of enlightenment is known also as the age of revolution because it was during that time that America wished to ask for independence, when political writings, political pamphlets, and writers highlighting the ideology of exceptionalism, individualism, and difference began to emerge. After Rip Van Winkle wakes up, he finds himself in American independence, in an independent country, so to speak. So here it is the age of romanticism, because he slept surrounded by nature. Here it is the age of romanticism, which is a reaction against logic. Here, just to point out to something, the writer changed the setting to meet his literary and cultural ideologies. He celebrates nature by the beginning of the story, describing the beauty of the mountains and the vastness of the wilderness, and the fact that Rip sleeps in the woods refers to the idea of imagination and nature as haven. There is no reference to the revolutionary period in the story because Rip Van Winkle sleeps for 20 years. It is not because the writer was against the revolution, but I think, and this is a personal belief, I think that there is no reference to the age of enlightenment or the age of reason because romantic writers were against the enlightenment, were against this age where the industrial revolution was highlighted, believing that the enlightenment destroyed nature. In this context, we see that Rip Van Winkle enjoyed the fruit of the revolution. The shift from colonial to independent America directly poses the question of why did the writer miss the age of revolution? Why did he choose to slumber his hero, his protagonist, into 20 years of deep sleeping? I repeat again, I think it is because the writer was a romantic writer. He was against the age of the Enlightenment. It is in this age in particular that America started to ask for its independence by the revolution. The writer was not against the revolution, but he was against the age of reason. He believed maybe that it was preferable for him to skip this period by the idea of transitioning, the shift directly to the Romantic era. This story, of course, is steeped in romanticism. It is not about symbolism and folklore, but it is also about the romantic beginnings in American literature at that time. We'll explore some elements related to romanticism as a movement and how are they pinpointed, highlighted in the story, relating to the fact that Washington Irving, the writer of this short story, is a romantic writer. Starting with the common man ideology, the Squire Jack embodying the Jacksonian era. The painting that you see on the upper left side from 1858, it celebrates the freedom of the American common man. It is known as the Squire Jack. The meaning of this painting here symbolizes the ideology of the everyday man, the normal person who is a landowner, a squire. This landowner, being a white male in particular, deserves to be rewarded for his efforts in the war of the revolution. As a kind of a reward, owning a piece of land is something encouraging and rewarding. With this gesture, he is considered someone who contributed to enhance society. The common man in America symbolizes the everyday working class man, not a wealthy landowner or a man of power like a politician. Of course, here this ideology started, let's say, as a reaction to both Puritanism and the Enlightenment, focusing on the ordinary aspects of life and the ordinary man who can contribute to society. It also promoted the Democratic Party under Andrew Jackson, thinking that everyone in society can add to the betterment of life. The political decisions in America are not decided by the elitists only, but all human beings, all citizens, and everyone with the capacity to change can contribute in this. In the story, for example, the common man is the one who led the revolution, struggling the calamities and difficulties. As a consequence, he deserves a better life. So with the idea or the age of the common man became able to vote and freely express his opinion. He is an average man with humble origins, but he can manage with everyday experience to contribute, to leave a trace, a stamp in society. Is Rip Van Winkle, for example, a common man in the story? No. Rip Van Winkle as a character is not a common man. He is humble, yes, but he did not contribute to the betterment of society. When people and great leaders and thinkers were hoping to find a way out, asking for their freedom, Rip Van Winkle was sleeping. So he does not symbolize the ideology of the common man. Another remarkable aspect in relation to American Romanticism is the idea of individualism or exceptionalism. It suggests the fact that Americans or the American man is individualistic. He can be different, exceptional, and special, in contradiction to the collective culture, meaning society. This ideology signifies that the American man can be distinguished. He does not need the opinion of others. He can do things by himself. He can be different and creative. It is all about creativity. In this context, these romantic thinkers were against the grain. They were somehow thinking outside the box, as we say. They were against society, against conformism. They wanted to be different. For example, in the story, the people who lived during colonial America had a kind of collective culture. They didn't think of the revolution. No one of them was distinctive. So in the story, for example, individualism is better highlighted in the leaders who gave hope and distinguished themselves from the group with their ideas and ideologies. For example, George Washington from the story is the example of a special individual who led the nation to freedom. He is presented through his personal achievements and political opinions or ideologies. Nature is highly celebrated in the Romantic movement. It is seen as sacred, representing haven, a refuge. Also, it is seen as a harmonious entity, creating unity, the unity that man can find between himself and the universe. I have already explained this, and I said that the kind of mechanism existing in the universe and the kind of mechanism existing within the human being through his brain and his body brings us to connect to God, because we understand that there is someone greater, higher than this small world. The universe, for example, being the macrocosmic entity, reflects how small we seem to be in connection or contradiction to this world. With us being able to understand this, we create unity and harmony between ourselves, universe, and God. And we submit to the greatness of God and the greatness of the universe. This is the kind of relationship, this is the haven that the romantic writers and thinkers find in nature. They are inspired by nature. So the focus on the landscape in this regard is an escape from society, societal chains. They are, in this aspect, opposing industrialization and urbanization. Of course, for them, nature is a symbol of freedom, and the Industrial Revolution has destroyed nature. In this context, Rip Van Winkle is free and liberated from the conventions of society and his town, and of course from his wife, who imposes her opinions on him. With him being alone into nature, he is embraced, protected. He finds refuge in the woods. And with this, he admits himself to this kind of wilderness, because he thinks that it is the only peaceful place where he can fit in. Some other elements in relation to romanticism are imagination, emotions and feelings, and creativity. Imagination and emotions are elements opposing the Enlightenment, reason, and logic. In the story, for example, we see that Rip Van Winkle is not a creative man. He does not imagine. He does not add anything to better his society or better his life. He is symbolized or depicted as a lazy person. But imagination is employed in the story through throwing Rip Van Winkle in this imaginative setting. It is through the imaginative setting, the meeting with the Dutch, that changed his life. It wasn't his own imagination, but the setting that changed his life and transformed him into an old man after 20 years of sleeping. So the writer was smart enough to employ this element of imagination and creativity through showing the fantastical element in the story, adding a phantasmic, imaginative aspect to beautify the story, to add the kind of mythical, legendary, let's say, flavor to the story. In relation, connecting it, of course, to Romanticism as a movement. Other important themes from the story are freedom, progress and change, history and mythology or fiction, and most importantly, national identity. Just briefly, we say that freedom is a theme in the story through the way colonial America transfers into a free, independent country, when new Americans won the war against the British Crown, and also through Rip Van Winkle being freed from his wife when escaping to the forest. Another theme, which is progress and change, is signified via the 20 years of sleeping, where life changed and people matured and become more cultivated in terms of their lives as individuals. A new age of modern life and modern America. History versus fiction. When the writer mixed facts with fiction, he meant to remind the nation of its history, creating a new type of writing of that time by adding fantastical elements into reality. Most importantly, national identity is an appreciable theme, because at that time, after the independence, American people were still in search for their identity. Throughout American literature as a whole, from its beginning to this day, national identity, or the search and quest for identity, is always an important theme. We can see this even with American movies. We see that characters in stories or in movies are always in search for themselves, search for a way out. In the Romantic era, or the Romantic genre, people were newly detached from Britain. It was difficult for them to make decisions and construct their own nation or self. This is how they created the myth of the American hero, encouraging people to become heroic in their actions and always aspire and hope for the better. There is also a very significant aspect to refer to here in relation to heroism. It was a time where they wanted to aspire people of a hero who can always save them, signifying that there is always a way out. Something that I want to refer to in relation to Romanticism in America is the theory or the philosophy of transcendentalism. It is an ideology believing that man can transcend in relation to nature and God. I am here connecting briefly the similarities between European and American romanticisms. Of course, they shared qualities and similar notions in relation to creativity, freedom, feelings, and nature. And they have both denied and were against Industrial Revolution, believing that it destroyed nature, it destroyed imagination. Any movement coming after another important period was a kind of a reaction. Romanticism here was a reaction against the age of enlightenment and logic. It is through the age of the Enlightenment that the Industrial Revolution flourished. They were encouraging people to urbanize, to better cultivate. For the Romantic writers generally throughout the world, who were also ecological writers, caring for nature and trying to protect nature, they attempted to deny the industrial lifestyle and always favor nature. In America, it started in the late 1830s. It did not last much, but its importance and impact on the people and the literature was remarkable and massive. What is different between American Romanticism and the European one is that with American Romanticism they added a very significant philosophy known as transcendentalism. They believe that man can transcend to find harmony and unity in the universe. The triangle of Trinity, the romantic Trinity as I like to call it, as you see on the upper side, left side, the upper left side, you can see here that God is on top of the triangle or pyramid, and then we have man and nature. With this kind of connectedness between man and nature, and then the harmony they can bridge together, they find man finds connection with God, and it is through the connection with God that man is in the sublime. He transcends beyond the natural material world. Here, by this kind of transcending, man becomes a better version of himself, different and exceptional. For the transcendentalists, man can find the truth when relying on his own intuition and inner truthfulness. Transcendentalists as thinkers were against society because they believe that society kills creativity, another important element of Romanticism. Society for them destroys goodness and creativity. For them, inner intuition is important because man is created in common sense, pure. It is society that destroys them. To encourage this ideology, they have tried to promote the belief that man should always come back to his inner purity and intuition. It is there where he can find harmony, peace, and truthfulness. The triangle of goodness, positivity, and transcendentalism can flip backwards. Another group of writers and thinkers, known as dark romantics, emerged to suggest another side, flip side of positive romanticism or transcendentalism. Unfortunately, because of time pressure, we couldn't cover this part, but I can highlight this briefly. Of course, you see here elements of nature, but it is a different type of nature. It is not the nature that we aspire from if we are positive or if we are promoting ability, potential, and goodness. It is creepy type of nature related to psychotic individuals, a horrifying nature. For this group of romantic writers, dark romantic writers, they suggested that there is no goodness in man. For the transcendentalists, they suggested that purity exists. But for the dark romantics, they suggest that evil is the only thing governing our inner side. Dark romantics focused on the inner darkness and evil because they believe that life can be difficult, pessimistic, and hard. They related this to the American problems, civil war, difficulty, and poverty American people were suffering from at the time, believing that the transcendentalists were positive people, ignoring the fact that America was wallowing in hardship and plight. In relation to literature, for example, the dark romantic character is never positive and always pessimistic. They are generally mad people, psychotic and deviant from society. Unfortunately for them, they are rooted in dark nature. It is a reflection also to the exterior side of nature, where we see the dark forest, the haunted places, the scary cottages. In their context of darkness, this life and the darkness of life can only lead to evil. Unfortunately for them, these romantic characters, dark romantic characters, die tragically at the end. Instead of them finding connection with God through nature, abiding by godly rules and unifying themselves to the beauty of nature as a refuge, transcending to God and harmonizing with the sublime, they instead descend to the abyss. Instead of transcending, they descend. Of course, the idea of dark romanticism is not highlighted in Rip Van Winkle because the early romantics only focused on positivity and positive change in relation to the individual potential, capacity, and goodness. I only added this part to explain this movement in its both trajectories. The relationship of the revolutionary era in America to this story is important because in this story we find an example of American revolution and independence, and then it is connected to the coming movement at that time, which is Romanticism. With this, we can say that American people, American short stories or even poems were really an extension of their time. Stories mostly and poems were contextual. They were telling what was taking place in society. They were depicting life as it is. They were celebrating achievements in society as they used to be. The example or the story of the revolution in American literature, celebrating nature and appreciating nature, was a part of that period of independence. We see that Washington Irving, as a writer, managed to highlight this. He described the story of revolution and independence through magic, through imagination, and through symbols. This is all for now. I hope you find this useful, inshallah. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me via email or leave a comment in the comment section below. Thank you for your attention and patience, and salam.